All right, moving on in Gravity's Rainbow, we are on episode 2 of part 3. And episode 2 takes place the next day, May 19th, 1945, where Slothrop arrives now at the Mittelwerke, the factory where they were making, at Nordhausen, where they're making all the rockets underneath a mountain in a tunnel system. And so this section then, because the entrance to this section, you can pull up a picture of the actual Mittelwerke and look at it. It has a cave, it looks like a cave, and it's right next to a slave labor camp, a concentration camp called Dora, where they used all the inmates as slaves to dig these tunnels, this labyrinth of tunnels underground here. And so right away we have what's known as a descensus ad inferos, also termed by Leo Frobenius and Carl Jung, the Night Sea Journey, and by Joseph Campbell as the descent into the belly of the whale or the beast. So consistent with what I mentioned in the previous chapter, that this middle section, the whole middle section, is a nekia, a journey through the underworld with Slothrop, starting with the witch Gelly Tripping and her owl, the death goddess. He encounters her right at the threshold of his adventure here, as though she were in the role of the Sibyl in the Aeneid. And so we can think of the Aeneid as Slothrop enters the tunnel. In the Aeneid, Aeneas wants to journey to the underworld, to Dis. And to get down there, the Sibyl says, well, first you have to go pluck a golden bough from that tree over there. And so a pair of doves guides him over to the right tree, and he plucks it, and it is indeed golden, which is, of course, a solar symbol. It means the power of immortality. He's a temporal being. Here he has the power of immortality. So he goes, and she says, Karen, the one who ferries souls across the river Styx, will only take us across if you have that bough, because he won't ferry across living people. And so they go and they approach Karen. He says, I'm not taking anyone across who's alive. And she says, well, he has the golden bough, so you have to. So then they go across, and they enter in through a cave. The entrance to the underworld is known as a cave, and indeed, even I think in Italy, there's an actual place where they think that a particular cave was the entrance to the mouth of Dis, of Avernus, as it's also called. So I see this whole section as very much a descent into the underworld. It's replete with Germanic underworld imagery, gnomes. There are references to gnomes, to elves, to the dead. Indeed, the first thing, right when Slothrop goes in, there's this kind of atmosphere. He takes the whole, he doesn't take anything really seriously, but there is a point where Pynchon mentions the dead. He sort of always factors them in, and he says that this tour guide named Micro shows up, and he says, there is hurried basic instruction on what to do in case of any encounter with the dead. Remember, they were always on the defensive here. When the Americans liberated Dora, the prisoners who were still alive went on a rampage after the material. They looted, they ate, and drank themselves sick. For others, death came like the American army and liberated them spiritually. So they're apt to be on a spiritual rampage now. Guard your thoughts. Use the natural balance of your mind against them. They'll be coming at you off balance, remember. And so right away we have references to the realm of the dead. So this is without doubt, unquestionably in Pynchon's mind, a descent into the realm of the dead. As this whole section in the zone generally is, actually, it's a journey through the underworld. And so he goes down, and one of the first things he finds are these kitschy space helmets made out of human skulls. I think this is a wonderful description. I'll read it. Then come the space helmets. At first you may be alarmed on noticing that they appear to be fashioned from skulls. At least the upper dome of this unpleasant headgear is certainly the skull of some man-like creature built to a larger scale. Perhaps titans lived under this mountain, and their skulls got harvested like giant mushrooms. The eye sockets are fitted with quartz lenses. Filters may be slipped in. Nasal bone and upper teeth have been replaced by a metal breathing apparatus full of slots and grating. Corresponding to the jaw is a built-up section, almost a facial codpiece of iron and ebonite, perhaps housing a radio unit, thrusting forward in black fatality, and so forth. So we have an encounter with this cache of human skulls that have been modified with these sort of biomechanical motifs. Once again, we encounter Pynchon's biomechanical motif, where we have the fusion of this skull, almost as though it were an echo of the ancestor cults. And what's interesting here is that all through the Neolithic, skull worship went on. You find skulls everywhere. At the site of Jericho, 10,000 BC. You find it at Navali Chori. You find it at Chayanu. You find it at Çatalhöyük. Skulls are everywhere because the skull is the way that you keep the ancestral dead around. And this was the Neolithic culture in the Middle East was a very heavily ancestor worship oriented mentality. And when you worship the ancestors, you are inherently conservative, like the Chinese always have been, where the ancestral cults of the filial piety for the dead have been the primary religion in China. So there's always a hesitance regarding the new, innovation, the future. The dead always say no to the new. No, no, no. We have all the archai that were originated in illo tempore by the creator beings, and those archai are enough. We don't need anything else from them. This is why in Australian Aborigine myth, the Wandjina beings, and you see them depicted, they look like space aliens with no mouths, because their mouths were stripped from them after uttering the creative words that brought the original archai into being. Then their mouths were stripped from them. We don't need any more archai. We have all the archetypes we need. We don't need anything new. So this is the attitude of conservative societies. If they're past oriented, not future oriented. But the West is inherently future oriented. And here note that we have with Pynchon a recoding of the ancestral cult of the dead in terms of a context of futurism, rocket travel. These are described as space helmets. It's like a worship of the dead, only now they have these little bits and pieces of metal on them in connection with this kitschy spaceman cult and the rocket state, what he calls the Raketenstaat. And so interesting recoding of the cult of the dead here in terms of the cult of futurism. The West is future oriented. We're on the way in the West. We're always on the way toward the new Jerusalem. And we will use technology to get there. Doesn't work that way in ancestor societies in the past, where they don't have that kind of future orientation that the West does. So I find that interesting. This is a wonderful recoding of the descent into the underworld that is found in all the great classics like the Odyssey, and in I think in Don Quixote as well, and in Ulysses. There's a night sea journey passage there, the night town passage in the back of the book. So Pynchon is writing in this tradition of these great underworld journeys to the realm of the dead and recoding it in terms of modern technology and the cult of progress. So really fascinating how he does this here. He also works in a lot of Germanic mythology, Tannhäuser. There's that not so rare personality disorder known as Tannhäuserism. Some of us love to be taken under mountains, and not always with horny expectations. Venus, Frau Holda, her sexual delights. Many come actually for the gnomes, the critters smaller than you. For the sepulchral way, time stretches along your hooded strolls down here, quietly through courtyards that go for miles, with no anxiety about getting lost, and so forth. So, and then, of course, Tannhäuser, in Tannhäuser, especially as Wagner recodes it in his opera, it begins with Tannhäuser in the Venusberg. So there's another mountain reference. In the last chapter, we had the Brocken out of Faust. Now we have the Venusberg out of Wagner. And Tannhäuser is staying with Venus for a year, having sex with her constantly. He's forgotten all his duties and his chores. This is the realm of pleasure and sensual delight. And then at one point it hits him. He's got to go back to society and figure out he's got to do his duties. And then so Tannhäuser is all about, once you find your bliss, now it's disengaged you from your duties. Now you have to figure out a way to integrate them. The realm of your bliss, what it is that you like to do, that you're good at, versus your social duties. You have to be integrated. And so that's the reference to Tannhäuser and the Venusberg. And so there's a lot of play here with myths. Mittelwerk, of course, sounds like Middle Earth. Midgard, in Scandinavian mythology, from whence Tolkien translated that into Middle Earth. The middle realm between the realm of Valhalla up above, and the dead, the warrior dead, and then the shitty dead, the ones who aren't warriors, the cowards and the average common person, the peasants tilling the fields, they go down to the underworld beneath. This is a journey into the underworld here. And then Pynchon starts playing with the idea of the shape of Mittelwerk as a double sigil. The two Germanic runes, or the one for the letter S, is a sigil, and the SS have taken that sigil and just simply doubled it to create the SS. But he says, look at the shape of Mittelwerk, and here's an image from it. It has a central double S running through it, a sort of spinal double S axis. Whether that's accidental or whether or it was deliberate, the SS did have control of Mittelwerk. And so it's interesting. So he starts playing around with that symbolism of the SS, and the SS in relation to all kinds of different things and designs. And then he says that even the arcs of the rockets, when they reach Brennschluss, which is when the rocket goes up and it burns out, it burns out, and then the rest of it is just the arc of its fall. So it traces out this parabola, and he's musing here via Slothrop. He's musing on what about all these phantom Brennschluss points? He says, and what is the specific shape whose center of gravity is the Brennschluss point? Don't jump at an infinite number of possible shapes. There's only one. It is more likely an interface between one order of things and another. There's a Brennschluss point for every firing site. They still hang up there, all of them, a constellation waiting to have a 13th sign of the zodiac named for it. And there are some astrologers who think that there should be a 13th sign of the zodiac, which would be associated with Christ, of course, because Christ was the 13th. At the Last Supper, we have the 12 disciples. Judas is still there, and Christ is number 13. So in a way, he's like Apollo with the 9 muses going around him. He's the 10th at the center of the circle. Christ likewise is the 13th at the center of the circle that revolves around him. The 12 disciples, who are symbols then of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. So why isn't there a 13th sign? I don't know. But some scholars apparently think that there should be. And then so he's going along underneath these tunnels, wandering around. It's very surrealistic. It's sort of the realm of the dead. And then he starts hearing, he's really hungry, wishes he had a beer, and then he starts hearing down below somewhere in another part of one of the tunnels, and the one beneath him, people carousing. And he looks down through a hole, and he sees people drinking beer. A guy with a Hindenburg-type red mustache serving steins full of beer to a carousing party. He's like, I want some of that. So he has to go down, swing down like Tarzan on this cable that leads him, he crashes into the party. Talk about crashing a party. He crashes right into it. And they immediately start serving him beer, and they're saying dirty limericks. I'll read a couple of them. I think there's a lot of these dirty limericks through this chapter. Rocket limericks. There once was a thing called a V2, to pilot which you did not need to. You just pushed a button and it would leave nothing but stiffs and big holes and debris too. I love Pynchon. And then I like this one too. And they're all getting drunk. This is just like Auerbach's Tavern in Faust, which is the first adventure when Mephistopheles and Faust meet. And he says, show me the universe. And first they go to Auerbach's Tavern, which, as it turns out, is a real tavern. It's an actual tavern that has been there since the Middle Ages. And the real actual historical Johann Faust in the 16th century did indeed visit that tavern. And there are murals up on the wall depicting his visit to the tavern. And in one of them, he's riding away on something like some sort of a conveyance, like a beer keg that he's fleeing away from. And something like that will happen here as well. So we had the reference to Faust with the Bracken and the Walpurgisnacht in the previous chapter. Now we have the reference to Auerbach's Teller. I like this limerick. It says, refrain. Ya, 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 ya. In Prussia, they never eat pussy. There ain't hardly cats enough. There's garbage and that's enough. So waltz me around again, Rusky. And so on. Pynchon just having a blast. He can't even do an underworld journey seriously. Just to make fun of it. It's constant satire. And so then he realizes the party is being thrown here for Major Dwayne Marvey, the guy that Enzian had shoved off the top of the boxcar that they had been riding on. And for some reason, I think he thinks Slothrop had something to do with it, because as soon as he spots him across the room, as he enters into this part of the tunnel, he tells his soldiers, hey, there, get that guy, get him. And so Slothrop's like, what? What's going on? And so it may have something to do with the fact that Major Marvey doesn't believe he is this reporter, Ian Scuffling. But whatever the reason is, I think it's connected definitely to him being thrown off the roof. That would piss me off too. I mean, that would pretty much make anybody mad. And but he thinks Slothrop is responsible for it somehow. And so then begins a very entertaining chase scene that reminds me a little bit of the concluding sequence of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when they're riding on the mining carts on these, like a roller coaster. It's something like this, because what happens is, as he's running from these guys, And he goes into a paint shop, and he slips on the floor into a patch of wet Wehrmacht green, and then big splashes of black, white, and red. All this paint getting all over him, kind of vaudevillian, but at the same time, there it is again, the rainbow, red, black, white, green. So we've got the rainbow there going on. And then he comes to this guy who is named Professor Glimpf, which means mild or lenient, and he's described as a kind of elf, as a kind of wizened elf-like figure. He says, "Help me hide. These guys are coming. I don't know. They might kill me. Help hide me." And so Glimpf's solution is to take him down to this miniature train. So it's not a mining cart. It's a miniature train. And so you immediately think of Disney riding on his miniature trains. The whole idea of Disneyland occurred to Disney in the 1950s when he created a miniature toy train that he liked to ride on around the property of his house. And eventually he conceived from that idea of Disneyland. Hey, let's turn this into a whole thing. The people can ride around a train on the park, and then it becomes the monorail, and then Disneyland grows out of the seed of that. So it's Disney on the one hand. So Pynchon always wants you to think of something ironic, satiric, witty, funny. But on the other hand, it also links back again to the myth of Aeneas's descent into the underworld with Charon. Glimpf is here in the role of Charon, the ferryman. And so Slapip gets on, and they ride this miniature train around the tunnel system, trying to evade Major Marvey, who also is on a train car to try and catch up with them. And then his car topples over and falls. And then he and Glimpf run from the cave, and they run out into the soldier who drove Slothrop there was riding in a Mercedes that still has the keys in it, so they hop into this Mercedes and they drive away, and Glimpf takes him to his abode, which is one of these wonderful German castles. They're always up on a hill, a forested hill, and they go up to this aging, decrepit German castle, and Slothrop says, "This is where you're staying?" And Glimpf says, "Oh, I used to work here. I think Svitterer might still be around." So they go in and they find this German Nazi chemist who has a shop straight out of Faust. It reminds one immediately of Wagner in Faust, who is the one in Faust Part 2 who has a laboratory that he creates the homunculus out of, and amazes Faust with this creation. And so Zwitter, I think, there he is, stocky, dark hair parted down the middle, eyeglass lenses thick as the windows of a bathysphere, the fluorescent hydras, eels, and rays of control equations swimming seas behind them. And Slothrop's like, what's a Nazi guidance expert doing this side of the fence at Garmisch with his lab intact? And so the chapter ends there with him coming across this Faustian type, like the character Wagner in Faust. Okay, so we'll end it there with episode 2.